ESPN has released a couple articles about Michigan, or at least with Michigan in them. And on one hand, they say that one particular player is the X factor for Michigan. On the other, they say that his position group is the weakest that the Wolverines have to offer. That happens to be the wide receiving core. We're going to talk all things Michigan pass catchers on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday. We are finally back in doing a Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And so ESPN released 2 articles in the last 2 days, or 3 days or so. I've had a hard time keeping track this week. And where they kind of broke down, like, here's the top 25 teams, biggest X factor, and here's the top 25 teams, biggest question mark. And for Michigan, it's funny because the X factor happens to be the biggest question mark. Now, those things obviously do go hand in hand, because if your question mark performs, then suddenly things are going to maybe work out really, really good. Now, my big concern for Michigan entering this year is the fact that you do have a first-year starting quarterback. Well, it might not necessarily be a first-year starting quarterback overall. If Jack Tuttle, who wasn't really a starting quarterback in the traditional sense, but has started games for Indiana, if he ends up winning out. We'll talk about that kind of more in segment 2 or 3 here, but about the quarterbacks and everything. But obviously, you have to have a quarterback who can get the ball to the wide receivers, but the wide receiving core for Michigan is questionable. I agree with them on that. And I know that internally they will, they're telling everyone who wants to listen that, hey, it's really not a concern. You just haven't seen it. Yeah, that's right. That's why we're concerned. We haven't seen it. But nonetheless, there's a lot to really wonder about when it comes to the wide receivers in Ann Arbor, even if there is some kind of untapped talent. Samaj Morgan certainly was a player who played a lot better than I thought, right? Like I felt like going into the season, if there was a freshman wide receiver we were going to see a lot from, it was going to be Fred Moore. That felt more like the big option. Obviously Tyler Morris, who really showed off what he's capable of doing in the Rose Bowl with his touchdown. That's kind of like, oh, I was unfamiliar with your game, Tyler Morris, considering he was a starter all year in the slot and never really kind of matriculated. I think it was 13 catches on the season, and that was his only touchdown in his career. But now they'll obviously be relying a lot more heavily on him. So there is that. Let me bring this up. I brought up one of the 2 articles, but not both. So let's see what ESPN has to say about Tyler Morris. They say the Wolverines lost go-to receiver Roman Wilson to the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 2nd round of the NFL draft, but that could create an opportunity for Junior Morris to shine in his spot. Morris showed what he could do with a blistering 38-yard touchdown reception down the sidelines in the college football playoff victory over Alabama. The Wolverines are banking that Morris can give them a lot more plays like that as their new go-to receiver. And I do think that is accurate. But then here's what they say about the entire receiving core as the question mark. The Wolverines have a wide open quarterback competition heading into fall, but they also have big questions at receiver. All-American tight end Colston Loveland will ease the pressure on the receivers. And that's something that I don't think we talk about enough, like Colston Loveland. And I know we equally haven't seen Marlon Klein, but just by virtue of Colston being out there, like, he should have a really big year. And that could really help propel the receiving core. It's kind of like Jake Butt back when he played. Tyler Morris, who only had 13 catches last season, will need to have a big year as the headliner of a relatively unproven group that includes Samaj Morgan, Frederick Moore, Kendrick Bell, and Youngstown State transfer C.J. Charleston, among others. The others, they could have just said Amarian Walker. Maybe it's Peyton O'Leary as well. I mean, he obviously has gotten a lot of credit, being like this Cooper Kupp type guy, as Jim Harbaugh used to say. So certainly there are other names there. But at the same time, the group is somewhat unknown, no matter how much Samaj Morgan wants to say that it isn't, Sorry, we need to caffeinate. I know it's like 6 something, almost 7. I'm caffeinating, but that's where we're at. So CJ Charleston's interesting because he's the most productive of the receivers on this list. I think that Kendrick Bell, honestly, though, is the most intriguing. Now, Tyler Morris will have to be the guy that is like rock steady. He's going to have to be your Ronnie Bell. Obviously, he's wearing Ronnie Bell's number. He's playing Ronnie Bell's position. All of those things. The picture that I'm looking at right now is one where if you said, hey, that's Ronnie Bell, you'd be like, yep, that's Ronnie Bell. Like he looks like him, right? In pretty much every way. So that all said, I think that not Amarian Walker, but Kendrick Bell is the most intriguing. Ronnie Bell's younger brother. And we saw why in the spring game. Just for him to be able to have that touchdown, to be that deep ball threat. Lord knows in the limited play that I've had with EA Sports College Football 25, it's deep ball threats are sometimes in some games they don't exist. In others, it's like Samaj is just absolutely beastly. That's a video game. That's fantasy. So we have to see it in reality. And I think that Kendrick Bell and Frederick Moore and Amarian Walker certainly can be that. I like Bell and Walker a little bit more as far as that, and would like to see Frederick Moore being more of that intermediate guy who can kind of break things open from the middle of the field. Like he did in the spring game, right? Like they talk about him as a deep ball threat. They talked, you saw him in the spring game take a shorter pass and turn it into a long gain. He's got that in him. But I do believe that is accurate, that wide receiver is the biggest question mark. Because you look around and you think, where, outside of quarterback, where else? I know that there are more unknowns that make me feel a little bit more uneasy. Offensive line, despite Michigan's excellence there the last 3 years, it is a little bit different because the last 3 years you at least had part of the same cast of characters. You had Zach Zinter, you had Trevor Keegan, you had some of those guys that were kind of coming in and out of that swinging gate of Carson Barnhart and Trente Jones. Right? They were involved at some points, right? Like we saw Carson Barnhart and Trente Jones have roles in 2021. And even though they weren't necessarily starters until the next year, you saw them have roles. Now, Josh Preeb, Giovanni Alhati, I think that gives you a little bit of confidence there. Miles Hinton obviously had his ups and downs last year, former 5-star. Certainly you feel like this could be a really big shining year for him. All of the accolades that were heaped upon Andrew Gentry, and we'll see about Greg Crippen. But I am less concerned with them, and hopefully somewhat rightfully so, right? If Michigan's going to have an identity of being this fierce team capable of running the football, that it's going to be, you're going to need that offensive line to perform up to the utmost capability if that's going to happen. But the wide receivers, because you do need the ability to take a top off of defense. You do need to be able to, as I've even learned in my short career as a coach playing at College Football 25, you need to be able to have that ability to back those safeties up, to back the linebackers up a little bit. So they are absolutely going to need to be able to show that they can do it. Now, obviously, it's going to take more than the wide receiver position. It's going to take the quarterback position. So let's just move one position to the next. Let's talk quarterbacks. And we're going to do so here in just a moment. But before we do, listen, it's the dead of summer. That means there's not a lot of sports happening. Wish the sports would sports more than they are. But you do have Major League Baseball. That's one way that you can still enjoy it. And the Tigers, if you're Metro Detroit, like probably a lot of you are, apologies if you're not, they're suddenly looking like an actual Major League Baseball team instead of a ragtag group that was cobbled together to, I don't know. I'm not going to finish that analogy, but guess what? Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. So there are many things that I really like about it. The fact that we went on with the Lions playoffs and found out that they were saying getting in the door, standing room only tickets were $1,000. Game time, guess what? We found you seats for $400. That's how powerful this is. And then you can see the views from your seats. So you know exactly what you're going to be looking at all around you. It's absolutely wonderful. So take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So last week's mailbag is going to be tomorrow. That's how that's going to go. Apologies, just the health issues from 2 weeks ago kind of came back, but we are back and rolling with it. Although a bit weak, groggy out of it. So we're working back, and then it comes at good timing to start feeling more normal because we got Big Ten Media Days next week. Plan on going all week. If there's a day that we're not going, it might be Tuesday because I'm planning on leaving on Tuesday to go down there to Indianapolis on day one. And so hopefully Tuesday night we'll feel up to it, but that's going to be a long day. And then we'll do Michigan goes on Thursdays, but we'll definitely have Wednesday and Thursday shows. And then Friday, that's the plan, is to try to make up for the last 2 weeks with the full week. But we'll see what we can do. Anyway, so quarterbacks. I think the interesting thing is I've talked to a colleague who's told me multiple times over the last couple weeks, and I don't know that right? Like this is fall camp hasn't even started yet, so it's hard for me to sit there and say, okay, you're 100% right. But a colleague has told me, like, it's going to be Jack Tuttle is going to be the starter, right? Now, part of me has a harder time believing that because, like I said, fall camp hasn't started. But at the same time, I do remember when I started at 24/7 Sports, it was year 2. Everyone thought it was going to be John O'Korn over Wilton Spate, so much so that the day before the game, I'm listening to Sirius XM and people are talking about Michigan, who's going to be taking on Hawaii with starting quarterback John O'Korn. And Steve Lorenz, who I worked with at 24/7 Sports, had been telling me since spring, it's Wilton Spate, right? It's going to be Wilton Spate. So this might be kind of the same type of deal. I haven't heard anything. I haven't asked that question personally. But it also is fishy because it seems like Alex Orji is at everything. Now, that doesn't mean anything, right? Like some of the same stuff I've seen Alex Orji at, I've seen Jaden Denegal at, right? Like the Will Johnson camp. Alex Orji was a part of this week's Wolverine Boot Company photo shoot, which unfortunately, because of my health issues, I did not make it therefore, so I don't have any inside stuff on that. But I do know that he was one of 4 players that talked to the media who was there. So he is being kind of put front and center, and that's one of the tenets that we have constantly preached on this show is whoever gets put front and center to the media tends to be an omen of those who are going to have a big role, right? Like if it's fall camp and we're talking to, a player that we don't see that often, chances are they're at least going to be given the opportunity to have an increased role. It's not a hard and fast rule, right? Like we talked to Jaden Hood early in the season last year. We saw him as well in spring ball, but we haven't really seen Jaden Hood turn that corner yet, right? So it's not a hard and fast rule, but we've seen a lot of Alex Orji. We haven't really seen a lot of Jack Tuttle. Now, he was injured in the spring. I was told by someone that most of you would know that's inside the building that, and I've seen this repeated. You can tell you that that's probably people talking to the same one, but I've seen it repeated in some other media outlets that, hey, Jack Tuttle was behind 2 first-round quarterbacks and went number 9, number 10 overall in the draft, right? And that is something that the reason why maybe you haven't seen him really come out and do what they think that he's capable of doing. He's a former 4-star as well, right? Like he isn't a slouch. Now, he didn't look great at Indiana, but I think it takes a Michael Penix to look great at Indiana, right? Michael Penix outperformed expectations, really rose his group. It was like a perfect storm as far as having some linemen, having AJ Barner, having talent and development and all that kind of stuff. But when Jack Tuttle took over, it didn't look that great. But when he was in as a reserve for Michigan, it looked a heck of a lot better than it did anytime he was at Indiana. Just helped engineer some drives, looked pretty good. So it very well could be Tuttle. Now, I'm not going to be so fast to completely discount Davis Warren, Jaden Denegal, Jaden Davis, but it doesn't feel like they're really in this battle. Now, things can change in a hurry depending on the work that's been put in the offseason. We've seen how that works. Thinking back to 2010, right? Like Tate Forcier coming off of his 2009 year where he was the starter. Yes, Denard Robinson got some run, literally and figuratively, but it was that offseason completely changed the dynamic, and Denard was the starter. So I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but we'll see. But it's in some ways it's a good thing to kind of have that, because what it does is it forces everyone to kind of work a little bit harder compared to having a starter. I've known of some instances in the last decade where maybe the anointed starter, hasn't necessarily taken things as seriously in the offseason because he didn't have even a manufactured battle, right? I've also known situations where the nominal starter was in a manufactured battle and it had adverse circumstances as well, adverse effects. So it's, it all kind of depends on the psychology of the team. The good news is everyone's kind of pulling in the same direction. And Alex Orji told reporters on Tuesday that he feels like he's gotten better with his mechanics. That's been his biggest stage of improvement so far this offseason. So Michigan's going to need that. It absolutely is going to need him to be able to go out there and make those types of throws. Accuracy, I think that's the big thing, is he accurate? And we heard him say back in early June or late May, I think it was, I can't remember, whenever the Will Johnson camp was, that he's aware that accuracy is the most important thing. Mechanics helps with that. So it will be exciting to see what he's able to do in fall camp. But what I think is equally as exciting is the unofficial start of the season, which comes up next week. Big Ten Media Days. Let's start talking about what I want to know coming out of Big Ten Media Days. Let's do that in the final segment. We're going to get there in just a moment. All right, so let's finish out. Let's talk about a little bit about Big Ten Media Days. Got Donovan Edwards, Makari Page, and Crindy. Name's not Crindy. I'm suddenly forgetting the third representative for Michigan going. All three are from Michigan, so I should know that. But anyway, I don't care as much about the players, right? Like, we've seen Donovan a ton. We know that his hopes and his dreams all kind of hinge on this season, his ability to go out there and be that number one running back. But more importantly, it's about like Michigan being able to use him dynamically, right? Being able to go out there and use him in the pass game. I envision we'll see a lot of sets with multiple running backs on the field and different things that they can do personnel wise to make things more difficult, especially if you have Donovan, Alex Orji, and Kalel Mullings on the field all at the same time. Like, yeah, they might be running the ball. And if they are, who's going to have it? That's the type of thing that I really want to see Michigan really kind of lean into. But we'll see if they actually do. Max Bredesen is the other one. He's not from Michigan. He's from Wisconsin. But nonetheless, I'm less interested in kind of what the player perspective is. It's more going to be about Sherrone Moore. How does he assert himself as a head coach, right? What is his tenor at Big Ten Media Days? Because usually this is going to be a little bit of a different scenario, because normally when you go to the Big Ten Media Days, you have 2 days. One day is headlined by Ryan Day, Ohio State, or Urban Meyer before him. And the next day or the day before, depending on how the schedule works out, you have Jim Harbaugh. There's no more Jim Harbaugh. The two main characters, there's only one of the two main characters left, but but as far as like individuals, but you still have the two teams. But then you're adding in USC, you're adding in Oregon. It's going to be really, really interesting to just see how that dynamic works kind of as a whole. And if Sherrone can kind of cement himself as one of the stars there, right? Because it's going to be different with Lincoln Riley there. You're still going to have Ryan Day. You're still going to have James Franklin. Matt Rule's going to get a lot more attention than he has in the past because there's some buzz around Nebraska. Dan Lanning, again, I mean, Oregon very well might be the best team in the conference. Might be. You know, at this stage, they're close to a complete team. They've got the quarterback. They've got the line play. They've got skilled players. They're recruiting at a high level. It's so that will be interesting as well. But I want to see what Sherrone Moore, how he comes out. Because part of what Sherrone has done previously was still kind of do a little bit of more assistant-y type things in a lot of ways, right? I'm not going to reveal that, he might say. Or like, oh, we're just going to have to wait and see. And that's that, you know, you can do some of that stuff when you're an assistant because you're under a head coach who holds the keys to everything. But you can't obfuscate nearly as much when you're the head coach. I mean, you can, but you got to do it in a, like, you can only do it when you have the grace that Jim Harbaugh was awarded by being one of the top names in the profession at any level. But it'll be interesting to see, like, if obviously he's not going to answer scheme questions because that's just kind of ingrained into Michigan, right? Whereas like Urban Meyer, I'd sit with Urban Meyer, they'd ask him a flat out scheme question, depth chart questions and things of that nature, and he would just answer all of it pretty much. It was kind of mesmerizing as a media member that was accustomed to Jim Harbaugh. But he's going to have to do something to hold his own to kind of show that he is, from a personality standpoint, because you do need to showcase personality. And I know a lot of you probably don't think that matters, but the perception of the program, it does matter, right? And his grand entrance as the head coach came at a time when no one was really paying attention, right? The Lions were 2 days away from being in the NFC Championship. Half the media wasn't there. They announced it the night before, so it wasn't like there was this vast media presence nationally there, right? It was mostly just a handful, really, of local people. It was like the people you would see at a Tuesday night press conference, essentially. So this is the opportunity for Sherrone to really put his stamp on things and really impress. Now, he's done really well with Joel Klatt, and but it's going to be a little bit different when you're with media from not only the pre-existing 14 teams, but now you're going to have Los Angeles media, you're going to have Seattle media, you're going to have Portland media. It's going to be a little bit different. So it'll be really interesting to see how he comes in and kind of cements himself as a figure. Now, the biggest play that he can do is on the field, of course, once the season comes. But also, I think the bigger question is, you know, who are those guys, right? Like, he mentioned some names at the golf outing last month that I'm curious to hear more about, like Dominic Nichols. Like, what about him has really, allowed him to kind of acclimate? What are you expecting from some of the guys that have just come over the summer? Like, what have you seen in some of those maybe, like, you know, drills in the 7-on-7s and things of that nature that you're not necessarily coaching, but you're observing? Like, how does Jordan Marshall look? Can he be a guy that comes in year one? What about those other running backs? We've heard Tavier Dunlap's name mentioned a bunch of times. From Alford, from just kind of in, some of his teammates and some of these people have said Tavier Dunlap's were taking a real big step forward. Can someone like that, who of the established players that we haven't seen a lot, is maybe poised to having a bigger role? I already know he's going to say Jaden Hood as being one of those, but that's another interesting component. He's going to be asked a lot of the same things that we've heard him asked quite a bit about, like, how are you going to be different than Jim Harbaugh and all these things. And he's already kind of answered that. But what are the things that are outside of that? What's his demeanor on essentially a national stage? Because this isn't a regional conference anymore. It is very much a national one. Literally coast to coast, New Jersey to Los Angeles, and New Jersey to Seattle, Maryland to Washington. So how is he going to kind of differentiate himself from his peers, and what is he going to do with what he has? Like, how does he change things? I don't know how I'll answer that. All right, we're going to keep it short today. We're going to be back tomorrow if, God willing, the creek don't rise, which I know that's always famous last words over here. But again, it was kind of out of my control earlier this week. So, but we'll do the best we can, assuming that there are no physical relapses here. Not drugs. Not to make it sound like it is. Sarah thinks I have dengue fever, so hopefully that's not the case, but it's been a challenge the last 2 weeks. Anyway, we'll be back soon regardless. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon. Peace.